Hey everybody, so in this section we're going to do an introduction to cloud LLM APIs, but this is really more going to be just an introduction to APIs in general so that you get the idea of what APIs are for and why they're so important, especially in the context of cloud LLMs. So what are cloud APIs? API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it is a way for your program to go get information from something that is up on the cloud. So it doesn't actually have to be an LLM. APIs are a huge business. Everything you pretty much want to get, you can get through an API. So pretty much everybody who creates like a SaaS application or a system that they want to expose different programmatic elements of creates an API. So an API allows access to services, like it may be access to storage, it may be access to maps, like the Google Maps API. If you want to include Google Maps in your program, you would use the Google Maps API. If you're using things like Stripe or payment processing, you would use the API to talk to that system. So APIs are this interface between your program and something that is sitting up on the cloud. So a couple of the examples are the OpenAI API, which is how you would access the large language models from OpenAI. So you have your OpenAI API is one, you have your Google Maps. If you want to access Amazon's S3 storage, you could do that through an API. So APIs are basically a foundational building block, and it provides connectivity to something that's up onto the cloud from your program. So why would you want to use an API? Well, in the case of large language models, you're using APIs because that is one of only two ways you can access large language models. You can access it from the browser front end that they provide or the application programming interface that they provide. So the APIs are just a way for you to access something, and it's an easy way to do integration. Now, APIs use standards, okay? So for the most part, if you're using an API, if you're familiar with one set of APIs, you're familiar, or you can become familiar very quickly with pretty much any APIs. So the APIs, the application programming interfaces, are easy to integrate, and they're maintained and updated by the cloud providers. So in this case, OpenAI has an API, Anthropic has an API, Google has an API for Gemini, and when you want to write code, all these APIs for large language models are very close to each other. Okay, they're not a lot different. Now, what you want to do if you want to use the API, you need to go sign up. Okay, so if you want to use the OpenAI API, you go to openai.com, sign up for the API, and you get an API key. If you want to use Anthropic, whatever you're doing, and whatever other tools you're going to use, you're going to get these API keys. So the process is basically you register for your cloud API, you create your program, you generate an API key, and then you use the API key. Now, APIs can be accessed in a couple ways. One is with a software development kit, and SDKs make things really, really easy because then you don't need to know how the API actually works, or you don't even need to know the format of the interface from your program. Now, the biggest API that I am the happiest with, I gotta say, is the biggest SDK that I'm the happiest with is the MCP Python SDK from Anthropic. Now, there is a Python SDK, there's a Java SDK, I think there's a Go SDK, there's an SDK for using it with TypeScript. So SDKs are software development kits that just make it easier for you to use the API. Now, if you do not have an API, you use a thing called curl. So one of my favorite programming languages is PHP. Now, PHP, if there's not an SDK, you can always use curl. In a lot of cases, I find it just easier to use curl. Curl is a command line interface, and most programming languages have a way to get to the command line, and so you would be able to run your API that way. The other thing that you can do with curl is actually test your APIs from the command line. So you either have an SDK, which is part of a software development kit, or you can use curl, where you're accessing the API from the command line. Now, when you access the API, there's an authentication method, and that is how you tell the API that you are allowed to be there, okay? Because you can't, well, there are APIs that you don't have to have authentication. I can think of a few, but in most cases, you have to have an API key, or you use something called OAuth 2.0, which is a more secure way, but I have not seen a lot of OAuth 2.0 in the cloud APIs. And then there's another one called Java Web Tokens. Now, if you're doing some front end type of stuff, it's a token based where you can use JWT. So cloud APIs, and especially the LLM APIs, simplify the modern software development. You want to learn how to do authentication, and then, but for the most part, if you are going to be accessing LLMs, you're going to be accessing cloud LLMs using APIs. Now, one caveat to that is Model Context Protocol, MCP. Now, MCP is a way to avoid using the APIs, and it's a way for tools to communicate with the LLMs directly. But now there is a caveat to that, which is that MCP really is an API. And it is just a standard application programming interface that allows you to connect to your LLMs from your tools and allows you to have your the difference with MCP is it's a way actually for the large language models to call your tools. So I hope I didn't confuse you with that last part, but for the most part, you're going to use APIs and you're going to use software development kits to talk to large language models or to basically talk to other programs. So there's a lot of different ways you can use APIs, but cloud LLMs need APIs in order for you to prompt them.